Before we begin, I want to encourage you to go to patreon.com/nakedlyexaminedmusic to make a pledge in support of this show and sign up for the feed there, which will be ad-free forever. You're listening to Nakedly Examined Music, a podcast about songs and songwriters. My name is Mark Lintonmeyer. My guest for episode 98 is Phil Judd, who was the founding genius in the early to mid-70s of Split Enz, one of New Zealand's favorite bands. It's where Neil Finn of Crowded House got his start. But Phil started it with Neil's brother, Tim Finn, and you're right now listening to Sweet Dreams from Split Enz's second full album, Second Thoughts. He left Split Enz in 77, appeared on a seminal punk single, The Suburban Reptiles, in 78, released an album with The Swingers in 81, had a big hit with Counting the Beat, and was largely solo after that. We're going to talk about Flightless Bird, the title track from his latest 2019 album, then look to Kite-flying Day from the 2014 album Play It Strange, then look back to Lamplight, an album by a band called Schnell Fenster that featured other ex-Split Enz members. The album was The Sound of Trees, 1988, and we'll conclude by listening to No One's Best Man from what I'm going to call his comeback album, 2006's Novelty Act. For more information, visit philjudd.com. For more about this podcast, visit nakedlyexaminedmusic.com. Just one more thing before we get going with the interview. I want to thank Bandzoogle for supporting Nakedly Examined Music. What is Bandzoogle? It is a platform on which you can build a beautiful website for your music. Do you have a website for your music already? You should get something that is more flexible than just having a Bandcamp page or something. Those are great. But Bandzoogle is built by musicians for musicians, and it powers the websites for tens of thousands of musicians around the world, large or small, weekend warriors, Grammy winners, and it's got all the features specific to a music website, tools to sell your music and your merchandise without any commission fees. There are mailing list tools, so you can grow your fan list, send newsletter. It integrates right with social media, so you probably already have a Facebook page, a Twitter account. These will hook right into it, and they have live support from their musician-friendly team 7 days a week. So just go check out bandzoogle.com. It'll have links there for examples of websites hosted on this platform. They have many easily customizable templates. You can have your website come up with a song right there in your face. You can have a little animation, floaty text above your picture. All the cool things that are not on my website, marklint.com, if you go look at that, because that was designed in 1997 and has not really been refined that much since then, besides changing out the content. So be better than me. Check out Bandzoogle. Their simple step-by-step system will get you online in minutes. Their plans start at just $8.29 a month, which includes hosting and your custom domain name. Go to bandzoogle.com to start your 30-day free trial. Be sure to use the promo code NEM to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code NEM. Build your website today. So I will have played a little bit of Sweet Dreams at the beginning from Second Thoughts, 1976. And we'll talk over that about the string of things you did in terms of the 3 or so albums with Split Enz, single with Suburban Reptiles, Time with the Swingers, solo album 83. Was all the soundtrack stuff in the 90s after Schnell Fenster, or you were doing soundtrack stuff in the 80s as well?
Intermittent, really.
Okay. And then 2 albums with Schnell Fenster, early 90s, bunch more soundtrack stuff, and then, it's been like 5 albums with a couple of collaborations since 2006. So you've had a little late career renaissance.
Yeah.
Doing the thing, I think a lot of folks who are on a label and get all this support, then it just seems inconceivable to them to revert to being a DIY indie artist.
Yeah, well, to me, it's given me all the freedom I'd hoped for, really. You know, you've got the downside of being not pertinent or relevant anymore, but we all have when you get to a certain part of your life or career. But I don't give a crap about that. I do it because I love it, and nobody's going to stop me. It just happens. So I feel lucky to be able to do it. So I've had a semi-forced retirement due to health issues at the time, 15-odd years ago. So it keeps me sane, well, partly sane.
We're going to play all of Flightless Bird, the title track from the recent album, Flightless Bird. Do you want to give us a little picture of where you're at with this album, with this particular song, before we play it in full, and then we'll kind of get into the details?
I'm very much a person that what I'm working on at the time, like now, I'm working on some new songs and I'm totally 100% locked into that, and I don't listen to anything else until the job's done. After I finish tracks and songs, I very rarely go back and listen, because I'm also the F-wit that just pulls everything apart and wishes they'd done it better or differently somehow.
When you're doing all the mixing and mastering yourself, right, at this point, so you've done it to death. It's not that you just showed up at the studio, recorded one day, and went home and they do it with what they want. This is you from start to finish here.
Yeah. I became aware of digital recording, the hard disk recording in 95 and stuff when it was all happening. And I was never that technically sort of naturally minded, but I just forced myself to learn it all and do it all by ear pretty much. And I've never looked back because it was just all worth it. You wanted me to talk about Flightless bird? Well, nothing really. Just that analogy of being a kiwi, and that's a big part of your life, the symbolism of the kiwi. Stubborn little bird with no wings that just pecks around persistently. And the thing of being a love thing gone wrong and feeling lost and kind of hopeless and being flightless analogy, really.
Well, it was 8:45 and then it was midday. 2:30 rolled by, watching the time fly. Look at the sunset, suddenly it's midnight. Not a word have I heard, I'm just getting it served. Oh, I'll never give up hope, but just maybe hope's giving up on me. Now I feel like a flightless bird. You're gonna clip my wings. Now I'm a flightless bird.
Let's just talk about the layering. You start with a chord progression in words and then you fill in the details, or just sometimes it start with a rhythm first? Or
my home studio's up the back in a kind of refurbished bungalow, soundproof little studio. It's a little walk up back down to the house, and when I'm in the house I have all the acoustics and the mandolin and whatever lying around, and I write most of what I do now on acoustics in the house and then take it up to the studio and decide what direction to take it. I just wing it. I'm a wing it person. Sometimes I'll start with getting the kit done. I have no rhyme or reason to the way I do things, really.
So this is live kit. It's not, really nice sounding drum samples or anything.
No, it's really nice sounding drums. Don't use live kit. I'm set up to record one thing only at a time, one-man band sort of thing, whatever it is, via mic or through the converter.
One thing doesn't mean one drum at a time.
Layered in with pretty much live some drum samples. I do use some sort of more hip technology, but I try to stay old school. As much as I like a lot of modern sounds and stuff, I just feel like if I were to do an album like that, it would be full on like that in terms of techno, not techno music as such, but using the technology in that way. And I think you kind of got to stay with what you know, otherwise you can get a bit lost.
So I've found it interesting right here at the beginning.
It was 8:45 and then it was midday. 2:30 rolled by, watching the time fly.
The acoustic is very loud, right? You've got a little kind of expressive hi-hat and this lead guitar, this kind of country. Is that a telly?
I don't know. I can't remember. It could be my Washburn. I've got a nice jazz Washburn I use a lot these days for everything. I do have gathered a bit of a collection of, Gibsons, Fenders, Dan Electros, all that stuff. I've got quite a few, not a lot, but enough to sort of cover all the bases.
Yeah, I just found it interesting in that part, the acoustic is so loud compared to the other stuff. Like, I didn't even know there was percussion or, was kind of listen, when does it come in? No, it's actually there from the beginning, but it's about the acoustic there. It's even dominating the vocal there.
Yeah, it is. Chunky, chunk. Yeah, I just love acoustic. Sorry if this digresses from what we're doing.
Yeah, please.
But I noticed that you play a nylon string, and that's pretty much your thing.
That is the thing that I am most comfortable with. The thing I actually started on bass, but then when I became the main lead singer, or even when I was doing bass, I would switch back and forth. And so, yeah, pretty much exclusively try to just get a good rhythm section to play with.
Yeah.
Let's look at how you get into the chorus here.
It's over. Oh, I'll never give up hope, but just maybe hope you've given up on me. Now
You have a very distinctive vocal layering sound, where the big fill chorus.
Well, I don't know. I do what I do, Mark, and that's about it. I don't have any options.
Is there a typical number, when you're doing that wall of sound? Is it that you're doing triple parallel octaves some of the time and just filling in a couple things in between?
Yeah, I tend to overdo it, I admit. But I look forward to the day I actually do a song that's just one vocal. I'd like to hear it myself. I do like layering things, and I realize that the way I build things and the way I multi-layer things can be a bit over the top at times. But again, I just find layering and texturing music fascinating because I've always been a great lover of great symphonic music and whatever. I listen to more orchestral music and jazz than pop rock. I was lucky enough to be a teenager through the 60s, the mid-60s in particular, like bang, 65 to 70 was my teen years, and I couldn't have asked for more, really. It was just mind-bogglingly exciting every week, listening to what was coming out and all the rest of it. So I'm very influenced by and very locked into that identity, and I try to evoke that, not consciously, but it's so much part of me that I think in terms of, I almost fantasize that I'm still part of that time.
Of course, George Martin kind of production. I mean, since I started in orchestras, playing upright bass, that was the thing. And my parents were not big listeners to rock and roll. They were too old for that. I very much sympathize that when getting into rock and roll, in fact, it was kind of annoying to other players that I would kind of treat the lead guitarist like an oboe player. Like, can you just shut up until this one part that I want you to come in and do this cool thing? Whereas the default, if you have 4 people or 6 people in a room, is everybody is doing something all the time. Nobody wants to rest. So it's hard to be too symphonic about that without being too much of a control freak, without everybody resenting you.
One of the first things I learned about orchestral music, because I didn't get into it till my late teens, is that use of dynamics properly. Because as you know, a lot of modern music, it's just one dynamic and it stays that dynamic for the whole song. And probably as you noted with my stuff, I try to weave it a bit, to make it interesting.
Yeah, so even just getting into this first chorus here, you've introduced the wash of vocals. It sounds like this is the part, it's the big chorus, but actually there's still no backbeat. Like there's a cymbal crash at the beginning of it. There's a little movement. One would expect that you've now having a little hi-hat, and now you just come in with the big, and no, we're saving that.
Now I feel like a flightless bird gonna clip my wings. Now I'm flightless.
Well, that's the first chorus, right?
Okay,
It
yeah.
goes right down.
So the thing that sounds like the big chorus is really just the pre-chorus. You have this little transition. Da, 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 da. No, that's not the chorus yet. The chorus is actually the backing off part that it felt like a Who song, that's about to...
Oh, okay, yeah.
The sustain that you have at the very end of it.
Flightless bird.
With that kind of transition, it could go anywhere.
And it goes to a different planet, right?
Yeah, I love to turn you on. We could start a different song completely there.
I've walked into a different studio and they're playing a different, I do like doing that. I get a perverse enjoyment out of being able to surprise people orally,
Yeah, and even just how many times I was trying to figure out, like, you're doing the and then is it 1, 2, 3, 4, dun, 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 dun. No, it's not quite expected. You're obviously counting off from somewhere, but it's not anything that I can easily follow. Like, it's purposely punching you a little. It sounds like it should be a big string part, a big, something out of the rock world. But then the fact that you often, as you do here, sing along with it. Do you know where that influence comes from? The fact that you is that the 30s, 40s, Tin Pan Alley kind of thing?
I really couldn't tell you. I've got to keep myself amused while I'm working. So the great thing is I'm lucky enough to be able to not have to actually kowtow to what the general public want. I'm not catering for a market or whatever, except basically, essentially, I know that people that have wonderful taste in music, they enjoy music that meanders and wanders. They're not listening to me because they want the norm. It's about me entertaining myself as much as anything, as a musician, exploring, challenging, but still keeping it not too prog or show-offy, whatever. I'm trying to keep it natural and stuff.
Among prog albums, I always kind of preferred the ones that are more reliant like this on structure. That there's interesting things happening, but it's not interesting because it's Keith Emerson playing really, really fast.
Yeah, exactly.
That I can't reproduce that. It's more, the Genesis thing or something that it's just, why is this thing happening? And evoking some of that, what's cool about Dvorak or these other, I think more late 19th century, 18th century composers. We're not going to do this through the whole song, but let's get us to the next section, the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
It was Monday, then it was Tuesday. Welcome to Wednesday.
So like that transition, like that's what I thought in particular, you must be programming these drums because that's definitely not I'm playing the whole, like when you play the kit, are you playing it straight through or are you like...
That's all played in by me by hand.
Is it punching on, okay, I need something for this transition, so I'm going to go da-da-dum, and then I'm going to go ba-da-bum. It's not that you thought at the beginning of the song what you're going to do at the drums, the whole thing.
That was an amalgam of, sometimes I do write bits and pieces on the piano, and that was the part that I had that'd been floating around that just happened to really lock in being useful for that song.
Okay, so you'd probably have the keyboard already recorded before you'd even start the drum.
Not recorded, but, in my head and there, so...
So is this the bridge, this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday part, or do you even really think in terms of that? Are you just thinking like...
Second verse.
Okay.
It's the same chord structure as earlier when it's just the acoustic. Exactly the same chord structure.
Gotcha. Okay.
But to somebody like even a good muser like yourself, it sounds like a completely different piece of music, yeah.
I could have rewound to see, okay, that is actually the same chords. Certainly it sounds familiar enough. You have this other transition, you see the light.
Love's given up on me, oh no. And now I feel like a flightless bird.
Even when you're returning to the same section here, it's still pretty distinctly orchestrated. The first time that you hit that, as I said, there's not much drums in it. And now when you hit this back again, so it's really organic and growing through the whole thing. It's definitely not a like, oh, I recorded the drums in this part. Let's cut and paste to the second verse to make them.
Yeah, no, I very rarely do that. Again, keeping myself amused, I very rarely have two verses that have the same backing as such. You know what I mean? I always like to sort of develop it a bit each time or retract stuff one way or the other.
Just a couple more sections of this. There's an instrumental. Yeah, so that little turnaround at the end, this could be that we're introducing a whole new song. Another one of the things I like, say, about some of those Genesis songs or something is that whether it's A Lamb Lies Down on Broadway or the beginning of Duke or whatever, that it sounds like the beginning of like an overture to a musical. And this is what I'm getting out of this. Like, now we're having the big da-da-da-da. And, have you thought about doing a stage musical or anything like that?
It would have been nice to have had that challenge at one point in time, but not anymore. I've thought about often threading a storyline through, but every song I do tends to be about a different world.
Let's just get to the very end of this song. Any sort of general thoughts about how much is enough? You packed so much into this song, and this is less than 4 minutes long. This is still kind of a pop song.
I get a slap in the face from comments from people now and again saying exactly that. And to me, it's just my norm. So, you know what I mean? It's like if one is an artist in painting and one uses a really intense yellow, but everybody else sees it as a mute yellow or differently. You know what I mean? It's unfortunately or fortunately, I just get lost in my own brave new world.
So you get criticized for these being too long, or for not, you feel like, okay, the idea has exhausted itself. Now the song is done. But it would be very easy, with this structure set up and the fact that it's so open-ended, that do you place restrictions on yourself in such a way that structures you so it sounds like here that you had maybe 3 basic sections. Those kind of were the structure for the song. And once those were discharged, then you could be done. It wasn't going to have a third bridge. This wasn't going to be a 6-minute song. This was going to be a fairly compact one for you.
If I had access to more musicians that would play for free, I would do a lot more musically, and I'd get them in a lot more and do a lot more musical passages, you know what I mean, like instrumental passages and whatnot. But because I do have the limitations of being able to do what I think I can do capably, I stick with that. Whatever I can milk out of that is what I've got. So sometimes I do write extended bits and I just cannot do it myself, so I chuck it in the bin.
So something like Play It Strange, which is the title track of, we're about to play Kite-flying Day from the Play It Strange album, but I saw Play It Strange as a leftover song itself from the Split Ends days, and that is 6.5 minutes long and is very orchestral and wandering. So that sounds like, from what you're saying, that is something that, if you were writing that fresh, as opposed to bringing that through time to the more or less present, then maybe you might not have kept it that long, but because it was conceived that long in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
For somebody who's so influenced by classical, but still classical musicians take so long, a lot of them, to do anything.
I've worked with a lot of those type of musicians, yes, and I know what you're saying. It's a very disciplined, principled way of approaching music. There's very little artistic freedom and input from the actual musician. You are a bit of a robot.
I was just thinking more the construction of a classical piece. I just went to a classical concert recently, and they really have I'm just working with a piece of paper. I have in mind what instruments I'm writing for, but it's really an open canvas.
That is the parallel with how I like to think I work. And I have been very influenced by the peaks and troughs of how orchestral classical music works, and having the freedom to be able to play with different dynamics and whatever. To me, that's an important part of music. And I get very easily bored with music that's just flat as such. Because a part of why I do what I do is I'm kind of trying to find and emulate the sort of stuff that I'm not saying that I've got my head up my bum. I'd like to think that I'm making the kind of music that if I were a listener, I would enjoy. Put it that way, if that makes sense.
Let me ask you the basic question. So it sounds like, though, you were writing on guitar and singing. So it's conceived as a song, not as a piece that you then came up with lyrics and threw them on later.
It's a mixed bag. Sometimes the lyrics are there from the start, but more often than not, I have the concept for the song, and then I'll look at thoroughly and get the lyrics done after I've done the backing track.
Well, let's get another example of this out there. So this is from the 2014 album Play It Strange, Kite-flying Day. This is the one you recommended.
I recommend it because it kind of best sums up where I'm at, I think. It's not one of an acoustic-y song or a rockier song or whatever. It's got a bit of everything. That was why, not that it's a personal big favourite, sort of covered those bases.
You said this was inspired by Christian Jennings in your credits here.
He's a New Zealander who lives in Japan, married to a Japanese lady, good friend. He was actually here visiting, and he was telling me about how in Japan they have days called Kite-flying Days. As a translation, it's roughly it, Kite-flying Day. I thought that was great. It's just about, feeling good, and today's a great day to get the kite out. It's a bit of an analogy about getting high, but let's keep that to ourselves.
Feel the wind from the desert in the north on your face like a dragon's breath, blowing clouds away. Can you feel it caressing your skin like an angel's touch, chasing rainbows to a better place? Yeah, that we breathe. That's all I ever need. And scaling the dizzy heights, hovering over suburbia, and you know it feels just right. Here comes my gentle friend, so blow me away again. It's night, flat in special place where I lie on my back, takes me downstream. He's one with the breezes, a troublesome turn, sky full of ghosts on the mad dash to nowhere. Yeah, it's all I ever need. Way up high, supersonic scaling the dizzy heights, hovering over suburbia, right now it feels just right. Here comes my gentle friend, so blow me away again. Oh, it's the
As you said, a very nice mix of styles here. I hear that Split Ends was sort of often unacknowledged, but influenced by Zeppelin. I hear some definite Zeppelin echoes in this, in the guitar structures at least.
I'm not the kind of muso that I've never, the only cover song I've ever learnt in my life is Auld Lang Syne, because we used to have to play it on New Year's Eve at some gigs, and that's about it. I've never been one to take a great interest in what others are doing. Again, I hope that's not head up the bum stuff, but I'm interested in what goes on in my head and not other people's, really.
This is a really good contrast between the very ethereal acoustic verses and this.
Well, that is the thing I loved about Led Zeppelin, to be sure. You've got that spot on. You've already mentioned two of the bands that you could call an influence, I guess, in the halcyon days, being 19, early 20s. Genesis and Led Zeppelin, I did have a penchant for that ilk of music, for sure.
Let's see, we didn't really talk too specifically about the lyrics. We have the Kite-flying day, and that feels good. But in terms of feel the wind from the desert in the north on your face like a dragon's breath blowing.
I was trying to create a bit of a landscape of my experiences of kite flying, particularly here in Australia when it's a hot northerly wind and it's usually a hot day, and I'm trying to create that atmosphere really.
Just taking a kind of mundane experience and presenting it in this, let's talk about dragons and rainbows. Yeah, that, it sounds as trippy as you could want.
Well, and that again, that's from all the Chinese and Asian kites you see at these things. I don't know whether you have them in your part of the world, but they still have, in New Zealand in particular, because it is such a windy country, that a lot of people are into kite flying.
They have something in Madison here called kites on ice, where the lakes freeze over and people go out on the ice and fly their kites.
Wow.
Over.
I saw the highest hill in Wisconsin. It's not even 2,000 feet.
No, there's no mountains.
It's odd.
We have good lakes. We have lots of lakes.
Because from my knowledge, geographical knowledge, mountains are part of what creates those incredible winds. Yeah, okay, so kites on the ice, that sounds good. There's another song. Okay, I'll write that down.
So the pre-chorus to this one, the Scaling the Dizzy Heights.
And scaling the dizzy heights, hovering over suburbia, and it feels just right. Here comes my chance.
So the thing I found surprising about that is it sets up a call and response. You've started in on your Zeppelin-esque, then it has a pause for the Scale in the Dizzy Heights, and then we answer again. But then it seems like it's going to do that again. You're going to do Scale in the Dizzy Heights, da-da-da-da-da, and now blah, 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 da-da-da. But instead of that, it actually just gives you, it's a 3-line pre-chorus. It's not a full 4-line. So you can just keep the heavy thing going over it. Even though the vocal's going back to the A part, if the heavy part is the B part, then you're just combining them for the third one just to get you into the next section as quickly as possible. I thought that was cool.
You've got me. You've got me. This is the trouble with being interviewed by a musician. It's, I'd prefer it if you weren't a musician, but there you go. You know too much.
I know I'd asked you beforehand, hey, do you have chord sheets of this stuff?
No, but just in terms of structure and stuff, you're talking a lot about structure and layering and whatever, which I wouldn't normally get from this sort of situation.
It's just mostly that I'm just trying to understand, because it takes quite a few listens to get one of your songs fully in my head. There are a lot of them that have a catchy chorus. Neither of the ones that we've hit right here today have, one of those things that just has a phrase that repeats over and over again. And they're like, okay, at least I will at first listen come away with that. But for the most part, I think it is like a lot of classical music or a theater experience. I kind of think of Frank Zappa this way. Frank Zappa is so complicated, but I think Frank Zappa is in some way best if you only hear it once, because it's just like a theatrical, it's like seeing a movie once. Like you don't need to. So I was interested with this, that you're combining these two things. It's complicated structures. It's a little classical. It's got some of that theatrical element, but it also, really is rooted in vaguely Beatlesque rock. Often the catchy part is bop, bop, ba da bop, ba da ba.
I never intentionally set out to make something complicated. It just bloody happens.
Would this be somewhere you're just starting with lyrics on a page and you don't know what music you're going to put over it?
No, never done that.
That is one way to drive yourself crazy in terms of you've written a little story and like, how do I shove this into something that has bars and stanza? That you just cut out half of it.
If one worked that way with a sheet of lyrics in front of one and sat down to write a song, that's when you do end up with very regimented format kind of a bit. Our friend Neil Finn works like that a lot. He's very much a write the lyrics first kind of guy, and then we'll write the song to the lyric.
Right. Well, I guess it depends. If you're doing that, are you writing it in a way that rhymes? If you do it that way first, I do a lot of my, so it's just a melody and lyrics. When I sit down at a guitar, like it's the dumbest possible chords, like, because that's not what I was focusing on. So I would have to then go through and like, okay, can I add a ninth here? Can I do something to make this more interesting? But the thing, that made it clutch at my heart was something that was simple. Whereas if you just start with a guitar in your hand needs to be entertained too. It needs to.
Well, I'm the complete opposite. I'll write a chord structure or a chord change that just to me evokes something, evokes a vibe as chord changes and whatever do. That's what music does, right? So that's more important to me. And then I'll come up with what the song's going to be about. And then to find a lyric that matches that vibe that the music's written is important to me. To find lyric that sits with the evoked vibe from it.
Let me go to the wap bop bow part. Is there any method to the madness of where you would put lyrics and where you would just feel like, what, ba, 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 is fine. You don't need to throw more lyrics over that, because there's nothing about kite flying in particular.
No, but I am crazy enough to often write a song that may apparently seem to be black and dark and a down. It's about topically a breakup or a down thing, right? But I twistedly put in this stuff that kind of overrides that and ignores that and boo, and all that stuff.
So even just the part right after that, I mean, you said this is a feel-good song, but in the second verse, you've got this guitar part that overlays things with these two notes.
As the river I go to a special place where I lie on my back takes me downstream.
So that's a kind of a creepy chord progression.
Yeah, it's slightly dark.
It's slightly dark, but this is such a... No, you're talking about going to your special place, lying on your back, take you downstream. Like, that sounds like float downstream, leaves don't float, like a nice relaxing...
Well, strangely enough, and if I can talk about the reality of like that particular bit of lyric, that's one of my favourite childhood memories is in New Zealand, there's a lot of rivers and whatnot, and we used to go to the river a lot and used to be able to go up from the river mouth, spend an hour walking up a couple of miles, hop in the river, lie on my back and just float down for like 20 minutes, half an hour with the current, with the river. And that's exactly what you've mentioned there is that's what I was on about there, about that. No drugs or drink or anything, just a young teenager just off in a wonderful place.
What would make that vibe connect to this somewhat sinister...
I don't know. You've got me. You figure it out. You're the philosopher here. Get back in touch with your philosophical thoughts about it. Pull me apart.
So kind of throughout the song, you've got this mixture of, toward the end, you've got this like sustaining guitar solo, but you've got, so it's a very dramatic moment. I guess it's kind of a raga thing that you've got this sustained, but that you've got this little finger snapping under, like it's very chipper in the rhythm section underneath it. It's not just a big velvet underground wash. Somebody's going to get stabbed at the end of this kind of thing. It's combining the ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da with some Eastern drone kind of thing. It's just a cool combination.
That came about because of the nature of the chord, the slightly atonal chord change going on. That again, you overuse the word evoked, that kind of vibe.
Are you still using alternate guitar tunings to come up with some of this stuff? Do you even know a lot of times what chord this is?
Well, I hear atonal chordings and stuff differently. It appears after all these years than most other musicians do. Again, it's the classical influence, listening to Bartok and all that sort of stuff with that atonality in there, or occasionally or quite often full on atonality, and I get a perverse thrill out of atonality and what you can do with it and where you can push the boundaries with it, that it's acceptable or not acceptable, and it works. Some people, they hear one atonal chord and it's like, it's too angst-ridden for them or something. They hear it completely differently than, say, how I do.
Well, and so much of it depends on how you deliver it, that if you delivered it with a biting, distorted guitar sound or, something else really piercing, then that's completely different than just doing anything with acoustic guitar. And in fact, I wanted to ask you about, so both of these songs, they have a prominent acoustic guitar at the start. And are you doubling yourself, or is that just a fat reverb, a fat stereo reverb? When you're boom, ba, I'm actually hearing more of the bass out of one side and one more of the treble out of the other side. And I just didn't know if that was the reverb you chose or whether that was intentional.
A bit of both.
But it's not two guitars. It's still just one guitar.
Could well be double tracking. I do like to double track acoustics.
Do you ever double mic the same acoustic?
No, but I'll double track with a different acoustic.
Sure.
Just to get the different tonality, just to keep the ears amused.
For me, it's a big impediment on a day-to-day, wanting to record, just having to set up the mics and things for whatever the new setup is. I mean, do you just have a nice setup around your kit and a mic or two? Pretty much everything is so you can just go and be creative, or is it, screwing around for 15 minutes before you do anything?
Yeah, well, I have my mic set up next to me where I sit next to the computer pretty much like any little home studio. And of course, that's the wonderful freedom about the technology, being able to sit there and do it and then just turn around, press play, and away you go.
Yeah.
So I take full advantage of that.
When you go into an actual studio, of course, you're trying to be fast, but...
and you're waiting for the engineer to get a sound and blah, blah, blah.
Yes, the engineer is inching things around. I just long lost patience in terms of where exactly to put the mic in relation to the amp, and just put it in front of the damn thing and you can EQ it later. I don't know. That's my own laziness.
Without denigrating engineers, they are sometimes more fixated with them getting what they want in terms of engineering standards or perfection or whatever, rather than just letting the musician get on with it. Back in the day, in the 80s, whatever, when I did the 70s, 80s, a bulk of my studio recording, that used to frustrate the shit out of me. You're all vibed up to do a vocal and you go out and spend an hour getting the right mic for the vocal and meanwhile the vibe's gone. So, of course, because I've had that experience and perspective, the luxury of being able to do it when I want to do it and when I feel like doing it, and I know I can do it well on that occasion, I can do it. So I've got no complaints about, because as you know, when you're there in a home studio recording, it's hard yakka sitting at the computer doing the engineering, and you're also thinking about the music the whole time. What am I going to do next? Which part shall I play? All that. It's pretty exhausting. It's tiring, hard work, but I wouldn't change a thing. I would far prefer doing that than the old days of having somebody else dictate when I do something and the whys and wherefores of it in a recording studio.
So are you still finding that a lot of your time is sort of in post as compared to actually laying down stuff, that the mix itself? Because your recordings, for being entirely self-produced, sound so damn precise. Like you're definitely at least using a click track. This is why I thought you were using sequencing for some of it. But if this is all free played, then good on you.
No, I'll admit I've used pre-done drum loops and whatever, but I can spend 2 or 3 days if I find a bunch of drum loops in a certain tempo, cutting and pasting, playing with them, taking a snare from there and replacing that one. I don't just grab a bunch of drum loops and glue the bars together and bang, 10 minutes later I've got it done. No, I do put a lot of, when I do use that technology, I like to make it my own, put it that way.
All right, so now we've characterized the way you do things now. Let's briefly go back. Of course, we could do this for another hour and a half over your various projects, but to one of them from the Sound of Trees album, 1988, Schnell Fenster, Lamplight was the track you recommended that sort of captured most what you guys were about at that point. Do you want to say a little about that before we play it?
No. Because I'll be 100% honest, I don't listen to that and I have to force myself. I have to have a few beers in me to sit here and listen to what I've done in the past. To face it, I'm mind fucked, but that's the way I am. So I tried to listen to it so I'd be prepped for this, but I haven't listened to it for 20 years, Mark, so I'm sorry. But I do remember the gist of it.
waiting by the landline. She likes to be loved, loves to be liked, but she doesn't care. Just as long as somebody is there. Say that she won't, but she do. Like a moth to a flame, yeah. Make it be mine, give it some time, it might wake up back fine. I'm not the waiting kind. Say that you won't, but you do.
I had read somewhere that the way that you were trying to write songs with this band, that you would jam all the instruments together. Is that actually how it worked? Or was it you still just coming in with a song?
Initially, each album of the two albums, 3 or 4 songs that I'd pre-written that they liked and we went ahead with. But the whole concept of the unit was to just get together in a rehearsal room. As you know, the bulk of the band were kind of other ex-Ends members, the drum and bass, Noel and Nigel, and young Michael Donnelson, as he was then, the other guitarist. The whole thing was to just have some fun and see what we come up with, give it a go sort of approach. And we would jam for hours, for weeks. Nigel would record it on a reel-to-reel. I would take the tapes home and spend all night going through them and going, I like that bit, I can do something with that, I can make that a verse, and then gluing stuff together. A protracted way of doing it, but I loved it at the time because it was just, again, it was a challenge and it was interesting to see what we came up with. The process of doing it was interesting. And it gave them as musicians the freedom to be expressive at last rather than just be the drummer and be the bass player and be kind of ignored a bit. And at the time, I was into a mode where I thought, you guys are good and, let them have a big part, a say in what was going on. Yeah, admittedly, I did the lyrics and melodies and I was the one with the super glue on hand to make it all come together. But it was giving them the freedom to just jam as musicians, you know what I mean? Like rather than a song come in and go, okay, I've got to work out a bass part to this chord change structure. It was more like Nigel as a bass player being able to just go, oh, I've got this interesting riff, I'll play this for a bit. And just that freedom thing. Bit hippie trippy, but there you go.
In terms of just this locked in tight rhythmic unit, so is that you doing the funky rhythm guitar that's holding it together, or are you doing some of the and Michael's doing the synth guitar stuff?
Yeah, well, he had a guitar synth at the time and we liked using that. I remember that song's kind of based on the verse anyway, kind of a nice little dissension thing. That was me.
The guitar synth lines like this. That sounds like the kind of thing that we just were hearing on your new stuff, where you would play that on keyboard. So would that be the kind of thing, whether you remember about this particular song or not, but that you would kind of have in your head when you were going into it, and whether you're playing it or not, you're singing at Michael and...
Yeah, a bit of that, yeah.
Rather than it just being something that came out, because I could see the rhythm part being the result of a jam session, but it's just, again, too structured. It's very much like your newer stuff in its overall landscape. We've got really 2 things that could be the chorus, that locked up her heart, locked up her mind, locked up her soul. Oh, this is sort of where you would expect the chorus to be, or a pre-chorus. I wrote it pre-chorus, but it's way longer than a pre-chorus has any right to be. It develops itself. And then what I put as the chorus is the light part. Somewhere in the dense smoke, the fragments fly. Dun. So is that kind of how this is coming out, is very much like Flightless Bird that we heard?
It all comes back to the same thing, that I don't follow rules, and the whole rock and roll 3-minute concept, even though most of my songs still fit in that format, I just don't. I'm more going with the flow person. And if I strike on a part that goes for 7 bars instead of 8, whatever, that's what you get.
There are also interesting things rhythmically with the lyrics here. I mean, just take away and caffeine, like that's not how you say the word caffeine, but having the wrong syllable or just these strange little gaps in the middle of the line to give it a little punch.
The best or worst I can say about it is not conceived to be like that. It's just what happens naturally. That's probably the thing with a lot of my music. A lot of people think, Jesus, this guy must sit there going, hey, what can I do to be different in this bit, But no, it's not like that. It just comes naturally.
You might wake up and fine,
That's just what happens, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about sort of how, when you're coming up with melodies, are you often coming up with them with your fingers first or with your mouth first, if that makes sense?
Mouth first.
Okay.
I was talking to a friend just yesterday about this, about how, say, a lot of my bass parts, you'd be interested in this as a bass player, bass parts, just a general arrangement parts comes from me sitting there, I'll often write a whole bass part. I'll set up a mic, record a track of me just ad-libbing, dum, da, 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 dum, dum. And what comes naturally, I find that my best way of writing parts is because I am a vocalist of sorts, that I find that a good way of doing it, rather than sitting there with the bass going through different, I could do this, I could do that, what would work. I slot into the rhythm of things better sitting there as a vocalist going dum, da, dum, dum, dum. You know what I mean? I go, I like that, and then I just pick up the bass, learn what I did, and there you go. I've done the bass part. So
just that example you gave, because yes, this is the way I, strangely enough, write bass parts with my voice, with my mind first as well. And the fact that there were pauses in there, a really good just bass player, like those jazz guys that can go do 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 do, and they just go constantly. I can never do that. Like I need to have a phrase, and then I need to think, and then do another phrase and think. So I noticed, in these songs that we had picked today, in the first 2, where you were playing the parts, there were some very McCartney-esque, little melodic things just thrown in there.
I'm convinced the great bass player that McCartney I'm pretty much convinced that after this time thinking about it, that's exactly what he does, because they're so melodic, a lot of his bass playing and bomb walking vocal. I would say he does that. It's just a way that works for me and works for you, and it's a good way of doing it.
It's interesting we're talking about Schnell Fenster here, because I love Nigel Griggs playing, but it's very much not that. Like he really is a groove-oriented bass player, and it's very distinctive. I was just watching a video of you guys, and the fact that he often sounds like he's slapping, but he's just playing with a pick, and it's whatever tone he's chosen that it really makes it sound extra funky. Not sure how that's being done. Anyway, it's got the usual lot of colorful percussion, which you still do now, which I guess was always a question. Even Noel was known for playing the spoons and stuff. But no, actually on the song with the spoon solo, that's you doing the spoons, so that it's too fun to do these percussion, to write these percussion parts than to farm it all out to somebody else.
Well, you're talking about stuff I've done now or back then?
Actually, both, in terms of how that would work. Would it really just be Noel does whatever he wants with whatever is around?
With the Schnells, we had a policy of if somebody has an idea, put it on the plate, put it out there, and we'll listen to it. And it might be harsh to say, no, it doesn't work. But we were big enough boys to sort of handle that, not like 20 years going, fuck you don't like my idea, We tried to be a bit more mature about it. And it was open slather. If you came along with some ideas, let's have a listen.
If something like the staccato of her knuckles on the tabletop, and then during that part, you're talking about knuckles, and there's little...
Staccato of the knuckles on the tabletop. It's a syncopated rhythm to the clock.
That'd be Noel tuning in.
Okay, not you suggesting anything. It's just, that's the way it was working.
No, I give them full kudos and whatever for how wonderful they were.
So do you remember with this particular song how you've got a nice muted trumpet thing at the end, like where that would come into play? Is that even one of you? That's you squeaking on a trumpet.
Yeah, around that time, we went in the studio and somebody had left a trumpet lying around and I picked it up. And you know how it is when you muck about, pick up a violin, and some people, they can never get a note from a trumpet or a mouthpiece, whatever. But I found, strangely enough, the minute it hit my lips, I felt at home with it. So I decided to buy myself a trumpet and learn to play trumpet right then and there. And as bad as I was, it was still workable with.
It got a couple of good notes out of it, yeah.
Yeah.
If you're treating it like a percussion instrument, which is basically what that little part is. One last thing, let's just move back almost to the present to introduce. So Novelty Act, you're one of these artists that I'd been looking around periodically on the web. Is he doing anything? And so it was right after Love is a Moron, I think, or right when that was about to come out that I just go, you're selling stuff just straight off your website. So I have the CDs that you've hand sent me from over there. And I really liked this Novelty Act album. And this was No One's Best Man was the single you'd pulled out for that sort of has enough of the split NZ sound or something to it that could remind folks of who you were. There's a lot of variety on that album, like just as much as there is on the current one. Just say a little about this song before we say goodbye here.
Not really. It's pretty much a true story because I've never been anybody's best man. When I thought of it, I just thought I like the analogy of what the whole caboodle of being no one's best man is, basically, that you're a socially kind of not a popular guy. Just that self-deprecation thing that I tend to have buckets full of because I have no qualms about being self-deprecating and making fun of oneself and one's flaws because we all have them. And that album was particularly full of that stuff because that was me going, yes, I'm going to do an album, bugger it. I'm going to do an album and get your shit together, you idiot. You've got this beautiful home. Because I had built the home studio when I was doing film and TV. I spent 4 years doing full-on film, TV music for a cop show over here. And it was cop show music. And yeah, for once in my life, I'm making decent money, but that man, it was working 7 days a week and it just about killed me and I hated every second of it. So by the end of that, I took a couple of years off and I just thought to myself, I've got a home studio here. What the hell's wrong with you? You're still writing songs. Why don't you get your shit together and just do something? So when I hit the studio, started Novelty Act, I just felt like the reins were off and away you go. Just ride on that horse to wherever you want to go. And no restrictions from record company or anybody else telling you what to do. Just do what comes naturally. And that album is probably more than all the ones I've done, is actually more full of just me being 100% open slather. That's what I like about it as well. It's pretty wild at times. And the lyrics in particular are very sort of self-analytical. You should get your head around that. Because, you know, at the time I was, late 40s, early 50s, going through that phase of shit that you go through, you know, what's gone wrong in your life, what's all that.
I'm approaching there. I'm a few years from there, but I'm getting there.
Yeah, I know, but yeah, you'll find out.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time and your insight. Even if you claim not to understand what you're doing, you've lived it. So just being able to talk through some of it is a lot of fun, at least. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
You're no one's best friend. Guess I'll never be nobody's best man. I like to keep an open mind, let the crap fly in and out. I got so much I wanna say, but nothing to talk about. I'm a big time loser with my head set way up my ass. And if you need someone to depend upon, I'm the one you'd come to last. Authorities yes they really are. Look around, look at it all, look in our mirror. I don't like what I see, I'm far too gone and I go too far.
Thanks so much to Phil. He does not do a lot of other recorded interviews, so I really appreciate him finally giving in after a year of my badgering him and doing this. I'm sure it helped that I already interviewed Phil Manzanera, who is the producer of that Split Enz Second Thoughts album. So Split Enz is a band that I discovered in late high school. My sister had put me on to the second Crowded House album that I thought was brilliant. I was, of course, familiar with Don't Dream It's Over and Something So Strong, their big hits. But through my love of the Cars and other things early 80s, I've always had a soft spot for the more synth rock stuff. So the early 80s Split Enz I found really hit the spot. And I remember it being a scarily large purchase for me when, right as I started college, I went into the local CD store near my dorm and I saw import copies of Second Thoughts, the first album Mental Notes, and also the beginning of the Enz, a collection of singles and other things from before Mental Notes. And I bought them all at $25 a piece import. It was a crazy purchase, but I liked the band so much. And whereas the 80s stuff was, interestingly textured synth rock, the old Split Enz was almost like old Genesis. It had the prog rock thing going, but it also really had a sense of humor. It didn't have any of that new age, yes, sort of politics to it. It had a lot more old-timey Tin Pan Alley spirit to it. They would all dress up in clown makeup with crazy hair and funny suits. So really interesting music. I recommend you check it out. And I will link to some of their videos from the blog post corresponding with this episode at nakedlyexaminedmusic.com. So Phil was only on those first three Enz albums, and I was on the lookout for other material of his over the years. And I was pleased, as I told him, when I discovered around 2008 or so that he'd actually started putting out solo albums again. So I've been following those ever since. You can hear them all if you just go look at his Bandcamp page. All right, so with Danny Seraphine and Phil, those are two of my formative bands with veteran songwriters checked off my list. Next time we're going to have another new artist. Her name is Elizabeth LaFay. She performs under the name Globe Lamp. She sang for a while with Foxygen, if you know that band. It's psychedelic singer-songwriter stuff. So come on back and check it out. If you enjoy the podcast, I hope you will go to the iTunes store page or wherever you listen to this and give us a positive rating and review. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. And a great way to ensure that this podcast keeps happening is to go to patreon.com/nakedlyexaminedmusic, sign up to be a recurring supporter, which will get you access to the ad-free feed. Oh, and I have started to record a bit more myself and to complete remixes of some old material that will result in some of my archive albums coming out pretty soon. If you'd like to support that effort, go to patreon.com/marklint. And even if you don't want to contribute there, I have public blog posts telling the stories of some of these songs, which you might enjoy. I want to encourage everyone who likes the show to send me suggestions of guests. I'm only doing these interviews every few weeks now, so I have to be a little more selective. But I love hearing who my listeners are, what you're listening to, who you've liked or not liked I've had on the show, any ideas you might have. You can reach me at mark@nakedlyexaminedmusic.com. Keep on musicking. Until next time, this is Mark Lintonmeyer signing off.
Well, you wouldn't know me from a bar or soap, a barn out of furniture, an ornament, a rocking chair. It's all very well to cry now. Sweet dreams, everyone's